For 50 years, Harold Morrison lived with a secret embedded in his flesh. And the truth, it nearly killed him. What happened next shocked the entire hospital and shattered everything his wife thought she knew. Don't miss this unbelievable true story of war, love, and the wound that never stopped bleeding. Subscribe now, because the next story might just be yours. Dr. Rebecca Collins froze mid-incision. Her surgical forceps hovered above Harold Morrison's exposed back. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, the only sound in the sterile operating room. Her eyes, magnified behind protective glasses, narrowed as she leaned in, trying to process what she was seeing. This wasn't a mole. It wasn't even a tumor. It was something else entirely. Something that didn't belong. "What the hell?" she whispered under her breath. Nurse Patricia Williams, standing to her left, instinctively followed her gaze. She recoiled. Her gloved hand shot up to cover her mouth just as a sharp scream escaped her lips, echoing against the tile walls. Instruments clattered to the floor as she stumbled backward. 30 years in surgery, and she had never seen anything like this. It pulsed. The thing lodged in Harold Morrison's back, previously believed to be a benign growth, was wrapped around a metallic object. And it moved, not continuously, not like something alive on its own, but it pulsed, with his heartbeat, like it was synced, integrated. From the other side of the glass, Martha Morrison pressed her hands against the window, her face tense with concern. The ring on her left hand, the same one Harold had given her 48 years ago, glinted coldly under the harsh surgical lights. Her lips moved silently as she watched the scene unfold. Nurses rushing, instruments dropped, Dr. Collins frozen in place. Something was wrong. Very wrong. "Get Dr. Patterson in here," Collins barked, snapping out of her paralysis. "Now. Page infectious disease and bring radiology. I want scans. Full body. Stat." The OR buzzed with activity, but the air remained thick with disbelief. Harold lay still under anesthesia, unaware of the secret his body had kept buried for half a century. A secret that could unravel everything, not just for him, but for the woman waiting on the other side of the glass. A secret wrapped in metal, hidden in flesh, and somehow still alive. Dr. Collins took a breath, composed herself, and reached again for the forceps. She had to remove the growth, biopsy it, and understand what she was dealing with. But deep down, something twisted in her gut. Some ancient instinct told her this wasn't just a biological anomaly. This was history, living history, buried in skin and blood and scar tissue. She extracted a small piece of the mass, but it came away with unexpected resistance, as if it had fused to the object beneath. She caught a glimpse. Metallic, rusted, corroded. But not entirely. Something glinted under the layer of darkened tissue, something that didn't look like standard military shrapnel or bullet fragments. "What the hell is this man carrying?" she muttered again. Patricia, now steadied but pale, leaned in closer. "It looks mechanical." Collins didn't answer. Her mind was already racing ahead. She needed labs, pathology, historical reference points. Something about this fragment didn't belong, not just in Harold Morrison's body, but in 2025. It looked old, but not of its time. As she passed the sample to an orderly for immediate analysis, she caught herself whispering, "Please don't be what I think you are." She didn't know what she thought it was, but some part of her feared it was something no scalpel could fix. Milbrook, Ohio, had a way of folding time. Winters came and went with quiet dignity, painting rooftops white and muting the hum of distant traffic. Main Street breathed in rhythms unchanged for decades. The scent of fresh coffee at Peterson's Diner, the rattle of the newspaper machine outside Milbrook Pharmacy, the Sunday toll of church bells echoing through the trees. Inside the modest two-story house on Sycamore Lane, life moved with mechanical precision. Martha Morrison awoke every morning at 6 a.m. sharp. She brewed Harold's coffee exactly as he liked it. 1 sugar, no cream, and laid out his breakfast, scrambled. Eggs, toast with strawberry jam, and bacon cooked to a precise balance between crispy and soft. She'd done this ritual for 48 years. Harold, punctual even in retirement, shuffled into the kitchen at 6:30 with a groggy but familiar grunt. He always wore the same expression of mild surprise when he saw the food laid out, as if still pretending it wasn't inevitable. "Smells like a good day," he muttered, kissing her temple. "Every day's a good day if you're upright," she said, as she always did. Outside the kitchen window, the sun blinked over frost-covered rose bushes. A cardinal hopped between branches like punctuation on a forgotten sentence. Martha paused in drying her hands, her eyes catching the way Harold rubbed his shoulder as he sat. He grimaced, but tried to hide it. "Still stiff?" she asked. "Back's just protesting the cold," he replied. But Martha had seen the change. Subtle, creeping shifts. Harold, once agile and strong even well into his 60s, now moved like a man whose bones remembered too much. More than arthritis. More than age. She noticed how he no longer let her touch his back when applying ointment, how he lingered, longer in the shower, and came out with towels wrapped high, shoulders hunched. And then there was the mark. The mole, as Harold always called it, had been there since they'd met. Faded brown, the size of a nickel back then. Over the years, she'd watched it darken, stretch, sprout tiny veins that made her stomach turn with a nurse's intuition she thought she'd long buried. Now it pulsed faintly with each beat of his heart, like something alive. In the mirror, he always seemed to turn away just fast enough. "You should have it looked at," she'd said more than once. "Had it checked in 82, he'd say, biting into bacon. Doc said it was nothing then, nothing now." But Martha didn't believe it. She hadn't for years. One evening, after dinner, while Harold retreated to his workshop behind the garage to tinker, Martha stood alone in their shared bathroom. She stared at her own reflection, her carefully pinned steel gray hair, the soft creases forming maps along her face. She studied the photograph on the wall behind her, a black and white of their wedding day in 1975. She was radiant, he was proud, and between them lay a promise they had never dared fully explore. No secrets, they'd said, but both had kept them. She had never told Harold she'd served in Cu Chi in Vietnam, that she'd seen boys come in screaming with wounds they couldn't remember earning, that she'd held the hands of men who bled to death with their mothers' names on their lips. When she came home in 1972, she put that life in a box, sealed it shut, and chose another path. Elementary education, gentle kids, art on the walls, routines that didn't bleed. Harold never asked. He never talked about the war either. They met at the VA hospital in '73 when he was learning to walk again, and she was part of a reintegration volunteer group. Their conversations had been simple at first. Coffee, books, music. He'd asked if she liked Andy Williams. She said she did. Moon River became their song. But even as love bloomed, neither brought the war into it. Not really. So when Harold winced in his sleep or muttered strange things under his breath, she let him have his ghosts. When he rolled away from her at night, undershirt still clinging to his back, she didn't press. She told herself this was the price of long marriages. You love each other through what you don't talk about. Until now, because something was wrong. That mole wasn't just changing, it was evolving. 2 nights later, Martha stood by the bathroom door while Harold showered. The sound of water masked her steps as she inched closer, watching the silhouette through the frosted glass. His back hunched slightly, arms braced on the wall. The skin between his shoulders glistened red as if irritated. Then she saw it, the mark, larger, darker, almost moving. A flash of memory returned. 1971, Cu Chi, the burn ward. She remembered treating a soldier with a strange growth around a wound site. Like tissue had wrapped itself protectively around a foreign object. They'd said it was a grenade fragment, too deep to extract. The medic had warned her, sometimes the body doesn't reject it, sometimes it adapts. Could it be? That night in bed she rolled over and touched his arm. "You've been talking in your sleep again," she whispered. He didn't respond. "You said a name, Patterson. Does that mean anything to you?" He flinched, even half asleep. "Just a dream," he muttered. But Martha knew better. That name wasn't random. She stored it away like a piece in a puzzle she was only now beginning to solve. The following morning she placed a call to Dr. Peterson's office. She left a message, her voice calm but clipped. "It's about Harold. I think you should see him again, urgently." Later that day, as Harold worked beneath the hood of an old pickup in his garage, she brought him iced tea. He looked up with oil-slicked fingers and that familiar boyish grin, the one that had made her fall in love with him in 1973. "What would I do without you, Ellie?" he asked. She didn't answer, because the truth was, she might have to find out if Harold didn't face whatever was growing inside him, if he didn't let her in. The silence they'd built their lives upon would finally collapse, and Martha Morrison, who had once stitched torn flesh and comforted dying boys, would be left trying to save a man who no longer wanted to be saved, not from pain, not from memory, and not from himself. The house smelled like cinnamon, roast beef, and warm bread, comforting, familiar scents that wrapped around Harold Morrison like a wool blanket. He sat at the dining table, his hands resting flat on the wood, fingers spread slightly apart. There were faint tremors in his pinky and ring fingers, nothing overt, but enough that he kept them still whenever Martha glanced over. She had gone all out. A white tablecloth, their wedding china, and 2 tall candles stood proudly in the center of the table like quiet sentinels. The silverware gleamed under the warm light of the dining room chandelier. In the corner, the radio played a soft orchestral rendition of Moon River, the same version they'd danced to in the basement of First Methodist Church 48 years ago. Martha moved between the kitchen and dining room with calm precision, her apron dusted with flour, hair neatly pinned back. She looked radiant to him. Older, yes, her hands were thinner, her eyes framed by soft wrinkles, but still the girl who once whispered "I do," while clutching his hand as if afraid he'd vanish. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, smiling gently as she passed him. He nodded, but said nothing. His back ached, a deep, pulsating throb that seemed to come and go with a rhythm of its own. He'd taken 2 painkillers an hour ago, enough to dull the edge, but the warmth, spreading across his shoulder blade, was still there, hot, heavy, and alive. He had started to dream again, not just fragments, but whole memories, rising like oil through water. Khe Sanh, the jungle, the gunfire, the scream, and afterward, silence, like the world had taken a breath and never exhaled. He shook the memory off as Martha returned, this time carrying a steaming platter of pot roast surrounded by roasted carrots and potatoes. She placed it gently in the center of the table and sat down across from him. 48 years, she said. Can you believe it? Harold looked at her, then down at his plate. It doesn't feel that long, he replied quietly. Martha poured 2 glasses of sparkling cider, neither of them drank alcohol anymore, and lifted hers toward him. To us. He forced a smile and raised his glass. To still being here. They clinked glasses. For a moment the only sound was the soft clink of forks on porcelain. You remember our first anniversary? She asked, her voice light. The one where the power went out and we ate cold beans by candlelight? He chuckled. You said it was romantic. I thought you were just trying to keep me from panicking. They both laughed, and for a moment, it felt normal. Then Martha grew quiet. Her eyes drifted toward his shoulder. Harold, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Can I ask you something? He tensed. You can always ask. She set down her fork. That mark on your back, it's changing. He said nothing. I noticed it last week, she continued. And again tonight, when you were getting dressed. It's darker, raised, it doesn't look like a mole anymore. He swallowed. It's nothing. It's not nothing, she said firmly. It's pulsing. He met her gaze for the first time that evening. I know. Martha's hands trembled as she reached across the table. Then why haven't you said anything? Because if I did, he replied slowly, I'd have to admit it's real. And I've been trying to pretend it's not. Since when? Harold hesitated. Since Nam. Silence fell again, heavier this time. It started as a bruise, he continued. I got hit, back in 1971. They said it was shrapnel, something deep, not worth digging out. But over time it started to feel like more. Why didn't you ever tell me? She asked, her voice breaking slightly. I thought if I ignored it, it would just stop, like the dreams. But it didn't. No, he admitted. It got worse. Martha stood abruptly and walked around the table. She gently pulled his shirt collar down and gasped. The mark had changed even since the last time she'd seen it. It had spread, the edges now ragged and branching out like roots beneath the skin. A faint glow, not light exactly, but a shimmer, seemed to pulse from within. Jesus, Harold, she whispered. This isn't right. He turned toward her. I'm scared, Ellie. She knelt beside his chair and looked up at him. Then let's stop pretending. Let's go to the doctor. Tomorrow. He nodded slowly. Okay. She stood, smoothing her dress. Let's finish dinner. We'll deal with it in the morning. Just then the doorbell rang. Martha frowned. Who could that be? Harold didn't move. She went to the door and opened it. Sarah stood on the porch, bundled in a puffy red coat, her cheeks pink from the cold. Behind her, Emma and Jake bounced with excitement. "Surprise," Sarah said, holding a store-bought pie. "We thought we'd crash your anniversary dinner." Martha forced a smile. Come in. It's freezing out there." The house erupted into life. Jake ran for the puzzle box in the living room. Emma tugged at Martha's hand, and Sarah greeted Harold with a kiss on the cheek. "Still married after all these years, huh?" Sarah teased. Harold managed a grin. "Can't get rid of me that easy." They sat around the table, laughter and chatter filling the space that had once held tension. For a few moments, it felt like nothing was wrong, until Emma, perched behind Harold on her tiptoes, pointed at his back. "Grandpa," she said innocently, "you have a spider." The room froze. Harold turned slowly. "What, it's big?" Emma said. "It looks like it's under your shirt." Sarah laughed nervously. "Emma, that's not polite." Martha met Harold's eyes. "Take your shirt off," she said quietly. Harold shook his head. "Ellie, now." He stood slowly, unbuttoning his shirt with shaking hands. When he turned, the room fell completely silent. The mark was no longer a mark. It had form, raised, textured, branching like legs toward his spine. The center pulsed rhythmically, faintly, but undeniably. Emma stepped behind her mother, suddenly unsure. Sarah gasped. "Dad!" Martha approached slowly, her hands shaking. "We're going to the hospital," she said. "Right now." Harold nodded. "Okay." As Martha helped him into his coat, he whispered softly so only she could hear, "I think it's waking up." The hospital room was quiet, save for the occasional mechanical sigh of the IV pump. White walls, white sheets, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Outside the window, snow fell steadily on Cleveland, blanketing the city in a softness that felt entirely detached from the storm growing inside Harold Morrison. Martha sat at his bedside, reading silently from a battered copy of The Old Man and the Sea. She wasn't really reading, though, just turning pages to keep her hands busy. Her eyes kept drifting to Harold, who was asleep, his breathing shallow but steady. The doctors had given him a sedative after the scan, hoping to ease the stress on his nervous system. But Harold didn't rest peacefully. Not anymore. His eyelids twitched, lips parted. His fingers clutched the blanket as if bracing against something only he could see. And inside that sleeping mind, the jungle returned. When was July, 1971. Sun. The heat clung to his skin like damp wool. Harold crouched low behind a pile of collapsed bamboo, his M16 balanced across his thighs. The sun was dipping low, filtering through the treetops in thin golden shafts. He could hear them, VC moving somewhere ahead, just out of sight. Twigs snapped, voices murmured in a language he couldn't understand. Beside him, Private Madison adjusted the radio on his back, the static crackling in Harold's ear. Sweat poured down the boy's neck, tracing lines through the dust on his collar. "Lieutenant said we hold," Madison whispered. "No movement till sundown." Harold nodded. He didn't trust the lieutenant. Too young, too green, the kind of officer who read maps better than people. But orders were orders. And then, a flash, movement, a shadow darting between trees. Harold raised his rifle instinctively, finger on the trigger, but something in his gut told him to hold. A heartbeat later, the lieutenant shouted, "Fire!" Gunfire erupted all around. Chaos. Bullets snapped through the air like angry bees. Madison fell to the side, clutching his shoulder. Harold turned to call out, but it was too late. A sharp impact tore through his upper back, knocking him forward into the dirt. For a moment, there was no pain, just heat, confusion, and the muffled sound of someone screaming his name. Then came the burn, deep, radiating, like someone had shoved a branding iron under his skin, and through it all, he saw the lieutenant standing frozen, his rifle still raised, face pale. Friendly fire. He remembered that moment more clearly than anything else in his life. And he never spoke of it again, and Harold awoke with a start, sucking in air like a man nearly drowned. The hospital lights were dim now, the snow outside turned to sleet. Martha leaned over him instantly, taking his hand. "Harold, you're safe." He blinked rapidly, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I saw it again," he whispered. "The jungle?" He nodded. "The day I got shot." Martha hesitated. "You told me it was shrapnel." I lied. His voice was hoarse, raw. "It was a bullet. From one of our own." The lieutenant panicked. thought he saw movement, ordered everyone to fire. I hesitated, and I got hit for it. Martha's heart ached at the pain in his eyes. "You've carried that all these years?" He looked at her, ashamed. "I figured if I deserved it, I should live with it. I told the medics it was enemy fire, didn't want to ruin that kid's life. His father was a senator. You know how it was." She nodded slowly. She did know. In her own time at Kuchi, she had seen boys protect each other through silence, through lies, through scars. Harold exhaled. "The thing in my back, it's not just metal, it's memory, it's guilt, it's 50 years of pretending." Before she could respond, there was a knock on the door. Dr. Peterson entered, his familiar white coat over a gray sweater, snow melting from his shoulders. "I drove down as soon as I got your message," he said, giving Martha a small nod. "How are we holding up?" Harold chuckled darkly. "Holding up better than the thing trying to crawl out of me." Peterson pulled a chair beside the bed, his expression more somber than usual. "Collins sent me the scans," he said. "It's not just a foreign body. It's surrounded by a vascularized tissue matrix, organized, dense, unlike anything I've seen. It's as if your body built something." "Something alive?" Martha asked. "Not in the traditional sense," Peterson said, "but the tissue's behavior isn't passive. It's responding to hormonal signals, shifting. It might be evolving." Harold scoffed. "Great. So I've got a science experiment in my back." Peterson leaned forward. "You ever experience hallucinations? Vivid dreams? Mood swings?" Harold glanced at Martha, then nodded. "Lately, yeah. Flashbacks. Real ones. Like I'm back there." Peterson looked grim. "It might be stimulating your nervous system, affecting brain activity. Some of this tissue is connected near spinal nerves. There's risk, serious risk." Harold sat back. "So what do we do?" "We remove it. Tomorrow morning, Dr. Collins will lead the operation. I'll assist." "But Harold, it's not routine. There's a chance the mass has fused to your spinal tissue." Martha's grip on Harold's hand tightened. "If it's not removed?" she asked. Peterson hesitated. "It could keep growing, or rupture, or trigger a systemic reaction we can't control." The silence in the room was deafening. Harold nodded slowly. "Then we take it out." Peterson stood. "I'll let the OR team know. We'll prep at 6 a.m. As he left, Harold turned to Martha. "If something happens," he said softly, "I need you to open the workshop box." Her eyes welled. "Don't talk like that. There's stuff in there," he continued. "Letters, photos, the truth. If I don't make it, I want you to know it all." She pressed a hand to his cheek. "Then you'd better survive, because I'm not reading any of that without you." He smiled. "Deal." Harold lay still under the warm pre-op lights, his chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. The antiseptic smell clung to everything, his skin, the gown, even the corners of his mouth. Monitors beeped steadily around him, mapping his vitals like a countdown. The IV in his left arm pulsed cold saline into his veins, but it wasn't the chill that made him shiver. It was the knowing that something inside him, something buried for over 50 years, was finally about to be revealed. Dr. Rebecca Collins stood at the head of the operating table, reviewing the final scans one last time. Her expression was tight, jaw clenched, eyes moving fast over the layered images on her tablet. Beside her, Dr. Peterson spoke with the anesthesiologist in hushed tones. The rest of the surgical team prepared silently, each movement precise and efficient. Harold turned his head slightly and saw Martha standing just outside the observation window. She wore a pale blue disposable gown over her clothes, and her hands were clasped tightly in front of her. Their eyes met. No words, just a long look, a memory. Then she mouthed, "I love you." He blinked once in response. Collins stepped closer. "Mr. Morrison," she said gently, "we're going to begin anesthesia in a few moments. But before that, I want to be honest with you." Harold raised an eyebrow. Always a good start before cutting someone open. She smiled briefly, but her tone remained serious. "We believe the object inside you is not just a bullet or shrapnel. The surrounding tissue has developed its own blood supply, its own structure. It's not cancer, but it's organized. And if it's affecting your nervous system, it may also be influencing your memory, even behavior." "You're saying it's alive?" he asked. Collins hesitated. "I'm saying your body thinks it is." Harold was quiet for a moment. "Then, well, Let's take the damn thing out and see what's inside. She nodded to the anesthesiologist. Let's go under. A mask lowered gently over Harold's nose and mouth. A soft hiss of gas followed. The world began to tilt, slow and syrupy. As his vision blurred, he saw Martha again, her face behind the glass, her eyes full of fear and faith and history, then darkness. The operating room was silent, but for the low hum of machines and the rhythmic beeping of Harold's heart. Dr. Collins made the first incision with expert care, cutting cleanly through skin and subcutaneous tissue. She worked slowly, layer by layer, revealing the tangled complexity beneath. The deeper they went, the more unnatural it became. Blood vessels clustered densely around the foreign object, spiraling outward like the roots of a tree. The mass pulsed softly, in time with Harold's heartbeat. Tendrils of tissue had wrapped around it like a protective shell, fibrous, vascular, oddly symmetrical. Peterson stepped closer. That's not scar tissue. No, Collins said. It's structured. She carefully retracted a portion of the tissue and finally saw it, metal glinting under the surgical light, a rounded edge, dull gray, weathered, clamp. A nurse handed her the tool. She slid it gently beneath the mass and lifted. The object came loose with resistance, like pulling a tooth from ancient bone. It was a bullet, unmistakable, but what surrounded it wasn't metal. It was biological. The casing had been partially absorbed. The surrounding mass had etched patterns into it, tiny symmetrical ridges like circuitry burned into flesh. Peterson stared in disbelief. That's not just a reaction, he said quietly. That's adaptation. Collins held the object up to the light. It's like the body didn't reject it. It invited it, built around it, fed it. She placed the object into a sterile container. Then something happened. The heart monitor beeped sharply, once, then again, faster now. Harold's body tensed. A shudder ran down his spine, visible even beneath the surgical drape. V-fib, the anesthesiologist called out, his heart spiking. Push epinephrine, Collins ordered. Charge paddles, just in case. Peterson leaned in. It could be neurological backlash. The tissue may have been interacting with his spine. Collins nodded. Let's close him up. Now, move. The team sprang into motion, suturing quickly but carefully. The beeping stabilized. After 30 long seconds, the heart monitor returned to a steady rhythm. Harold was unconscious, but safe. For now, an hours later, in the recovery room, Harold opened his eyes. The ceiling above him looked like every other hospital ceiling he'd ever seen, dull, tiled, humming with unseen electricity. He blinked twice before he remembered where he was, and what had happened. Martha was at his side in seconds. You're awake, she breathed. He looked at her, voice dry. Am I still me? She smiled, tears brimming. Still stubborn, still handsome. So yes. He tried to sit up, winced. They get it out? She nodded. They did. A bullet. Mostly intact. He turned his head slowly toward the tray table beside him. On it, in a sealed plastic container, sat the fragment. Small, uneven, dull gray, flecked with faint copper. But the thing that made his stomach twist was the mass that had come. With it, preserved in a second container, floating in clear fluid, a tangle of reddish, nerve-like tissue, spiraled into unnatural patterns. Alive-looking, even now. They said it might have been affecting you, Martha said softly. Your brain, your dreams, your behavior. Harold nodded slowly. Maybe it wasn't the only thing. What do you mean? He took her hand. I've been walking around with a ghost in my back for 50 years, but I think the real damage was what I built around it. The silence, the guilt, the lie I told myself. She said nothing, just squeezed his hand. He looked again at the object on the tray. It wasn't just a wound, he whispered. It was a memory, hardened, preserved. I thought I could bury it, but my body, it remembered. Martha leaned closer. It's over now. He wasn't sure he believed that, but he wanted to, for her. And for the first time in decades, the pain in his back was gone, replaced by something new, something terrifying, something like hope. The storm had passed by the time Harold returned home. Snow still clung to the edges of rooftops and tree branches, but the streets of Milbrook were clear. The air held that crisp quiet of late winter, when the world seems to pause between breath and thaw. Martha helped him up the porch steps, one slow foot at a time. His body was stiff, still healing, but the pressure in his back was gone, replaced by a strange emptiness he couldn't yet define. Not pain, not relief, something in between. Inside, the house smelled the same as it always had. Faint lavender from the drawer sachets, Martha insisted on, and the ever-present undertone of old wood and lived-in silence. The living room welcomed them like an old friend, fireplace dormant, armchair waiting. The photo of Sarah and the grandkids still perched crookedly on the mantel. Harold stood for a moment, taking it all in. "You okay?" Martha asked softly. He nodded. "Just feels like everything's the same, and I'm not." She reached for his coat. "Let's sit a bit." But he shook his head. "There's something I need to do first." She knew what he meant before he said it. The box. She followed him across the backyard path toward the detached garage, now more workshop than storage. The air inside was cool, still holding a trace of motor oil, sawdust, and old memories. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, drawers labeled in Harold's square handwriting. But all Martha saw was the workbench, the one he'd sat behind for hours at a time, lost in projects he never explained. He knelt, slower than before surgery, and reached beneath the bench. There it was, a black metal lockbox, its surface scratched and worn. The kind of box meant to hold deeds, passports, or something far more personal. Harold turned the dial. Martha watched his fingers hesitate at the final number. Her birthday. The latch clicked. He lifted the lid. Inside were 2 thick bundles of paper, yellowed with time, tied with a simple string. There were photographs, too. Faded Polaroids, dog-eared black and whites, a few postcards. At the very bottom, an envelope labeled simply, Ellie. Harold picked it up. "I wrote this the day before our wedding," he said quietly. "I never gave it to you. I didn't know how." Martha took the envelope and sat on the nearby stool. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, carefully sliding out the folded letter. Harold didn't speak. He just watched. She read in silence. June 7th, 1975. "Ellie, if you're reading this, I either found the courage to give it to you, or something inside me broke enough to stop pretending. There's something I haven't told you, about the war, about what happened there, about me. I was shot in Quezon, but not by the enemy. The bullet came from one of ours, a scared kid with too much power and too little experience. I lied about it. I protected him. I buried the truth, and in doing so, I buried a part of myself. That bullet never came out, not just physically. It stayed in me, like a warning, like a reminder. And some days, I feel like everything I've built since then has been on top of that wound. You're the first person who ever made me think I could be more than that day, more than that silence. But I'm scared. Scared that if you ever knew all of me, you'd walk away. So if you're reading this, and if I found the guts to put it in your hands, I guess I'm asking you not to." "Shh." And Martha folded the letter slowly, her eyes shining. "You should have shown me this," she said. "I know," Harold whispered. "But part of me always thought if I did, I'd lose the only thing that ever made me feel whole." She looked up at him, tears on her cheeks. "You never needed to be perfect, Harold. You just needed to be honest." He nodded. "I'm trying now." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Martha reached into the box and pulled out one of the letter bundles. She untied it and unfolded the first page. To Madison's mother, it read at the top. Her eyes widened. "You wrote to her?" "I wrote a lot of letters," Harold said. "To families, to the boys we lost. Letters I never sent. I thought maybe if I put the words down I could make sense of it. Or maybe redeem it." Martha skimmed the words. It was raw, honest, filled with grief and guilt and tenderness. "You never mailed them?" "No. Cowardice. Or shame. Or both." She took his hand. "These aren't cowardly. These are confessions." She continued reading. Each letter was a window, a name she'd never heard, a moment he'd never spoken of. He had written to every man in his unit who didn't come home, describing the last moments, honoring the bravery, admitting what he couldn't say out loud. There were letters to his parents, to Sarah when she was born, even one to himself. Martha found that one near the bottom. "To me, age 72, you made it. Somehow, maybe not the way you thought, and maybe not clean, but you're still here. But if you're still holding this pain, then you didn't make it all the way. Let it go. Tell her she deserves to know what you carried. And maybe, just maybe, she'll remind you that carrying it doesn't mean you're broken. It just means you survived." Martha folded the final letter and set it down. The workshop was quiet again, but something between them had shifted. The silence no longer felt like a wall, it felt like a shared space, a stillness earned. Harold leaned back against the workbench. "You always said we don't get to choose what scars we carry." She smiled faintly. "But we do get to choose who we carry them with." He nodded. "I'm tired of carrying them alone." "You're not alone anymore," she said. "Not after this." He looked down at the open box, at the letters now scattered across the workbench like scattered years. "I think it's time to let them go." She reached for a small metal tin on the shelf. Inside were old matchbooks, one with the logo of a diner from their first road trip together. She pulled one out. "You want a fire?" she asked gently. He paused, then nodded. They stepped outside into the cold evening air. The fire pit waited quietly in the yard. Together, they lit the letters one by one, watching as 50 years of silence curled into flame and ash and rose toward the stars, not erasing the past, but freeing it. The knock came just after lunch. It was light at first, barely audible over the hum of the dishwasher. Martha was in the kitchen rinsing plates, Harold resting in his chair by the window, blanket pulled over his lap. He drifted into a shallow nap, mind caught between the warmth of the house and the fading smoke of the fire they'd made the night before. Then the second knock came, firmer, intentional. Martha dried her hands and walked to the door. Standing on the porch, tall and broad as a barn, was a man she hadn't seen in almost 30 years. His face was older, lined and leathery, with snow melting on the brim of his army veteran cap. He held a paper bag in one hand and leaned slightly on a wooden cane carved with initials. "Bill," she said, blinking in surprise. He smiled. "Still recognizes me after all these years. That's a good sign." Behind her, Harold stirred in his chair. His eyes opened slowly, then widened as the voice reached him. "Martha," he said, his voice uneven. "Let him in." Bill stepped inside with a limp, doffing his cap as he crossed the threshold. His presence filled the living room like a gust of wind, memories trailing behind him like dust. Harold sat up straighter, every muscle in his back suddenly taut. They stared at each other. It wasn't the look of old friends catching up after decades. It was the look of men who'd shared something too large, too raw, to name. "I heard about the surgery," Bill said, settling into the armchair across from Harold. "Figured I'd better come see if you finally pulled that cursed thing out." Harold gave a dry smile. "Better late than never." Martha offered coffee. Both men declined. She quietly left the room, sensing this conversation had been waiting half a lifetime. There was a long pause, the kind only two soldiers can survive without blinking. Then Bill spoke. "You ever wonder why I stopped calling?" Harold leaned back. "All the time." Bill nodded slowly, adjusting his cane. "It was easier. Not facing you, not talking about—" "That day," Harold swallowed. "You mean the day I got shot?" "No," Bill said. "The day we shot you." The words hung in the air like smoke. Harold's throat tightened. "You knew?" "I saw it," Bill said, eyes on the floor. "I was 20 feet behind the lieutenant. He panicked, fired at shadows. You hesitated, and he yelled at you. Then his rifle went off. You dropped, and the rest of us, we just kept firing." Harold felt the room tilt slightly. I thought maybe it was you, or Madison, or—" "No," Bill said softly. "It was him, and we all knew. But we said nothing. Why? Because we were scared. Because he had stripes. Because we didn't want to lose our pensions, or end up court-martialed. And because the minute you told the medic it was enemy fire, we let you carry the lie for us." Harold's jaw tightened. "You let me carry it for 50 damn years." Bill's voice cracked. "We all carried it, Harold. Just differently." Silence again. But this time it burned. "I wrote letters," Harold said. "To Madison's mom, to myself, to you. I never mailed them. Never even finished most of them. I tried to write you once," Bill said. 10 years after the war. Got halfway through, tore it up. Thought maybe you were better off forgetting me. You were the only one who came to the hospital. I owed you that." They sat in the thick quiet of confession. Outside, the wind brushed against the window panes, soft and cold. Harold turned to the side table, opened the drawer, and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside was a photograph, faded and creased, of 5 young soldiers standing in the jungle, rifles slung over shoulders, faces smeared with dirt and fear. He handed it to Bill. "Us," he said, right before Quezon. Bill took it with shaking hands. "I kept this," Harold said. Everywhere we moved, every drawer it hid in, it felt heavier. Bill stared at the photo, his eyes moist. 3 of them gone now, he murmured. And 2 old fools left behind trying to make sense of it. Harold exhaled slowly. I was angry with you. For a long time. You had every right. But I was also angry at myself. For not speaking up. For letting that kid go home clean. He drank himself to death by 79, Bill said suddenly. Didn't even make 30. Harold blinked. The lieutenant? Bill nodded. I tracked him down. Thought I might confront him one day. But by the time I mustered the courage, it was too late. Vietnam never let go of him either. Harold sat in stillness. I always wondered if it would have made a difference, telling the truth. Bill leaned in. Would it have brought the others back? Would it have pulled the bullet out sooner? Maybe, maybe not. But I think we all chose silence thinking it would save us. Instead, it just stretched the pain out like barbed wire. Martha stepped back into the room with a plate of sandwiches, placing them gently on the coffee table. Neither man reached for them. She sat beside Harold and took his hand. You want to know what I think? She said, her voice low. You both did what boys do in a war. You survived it. And now, as men, you're finally trying to heal it. Bill looked at her, eyes soft. You always were the strong one, he said. I just loved him long enough to wait him out. She smiled. Harold turned to Bill. You want to read something? Bill nodded. Harold rose, slower than he used to, and crossed to the shelf. He pulled down a journal, leather-bound, pages filled with shaky handwriting. He opened to a marked section. I wrote this the night before surgery. I thought I might not wake up. It's a letter to all of us. He read aloud. We went to war, boys. We came back ghosts. Some of us buried our bodies in the dirt. Some of us buried our guilt in silence. But we all carried the same weight. The names, the faces, the questions that never stop. If you're reading this, maybe it means I made it. Or maybe someone else needs to carry the torch. But if there's one thing I hope, it's this, that silence never wins. That memory, even painful, is still a kind of light. When Harold finished, no one spoke. Bill wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I should have come sooner. You came when it mattered, Harold said. They stood, and after 50 years, they embraced, an awkward, honest, weathered hug. 2 soldiers, 2 survivors, 2 men finally willing to bleed out what they'd kept bound too long. Outside, the snow had started falling again, but inside something had thawed. The first sign came in the middle of the night. Martha had just drifted off, the familiar weight of Harold's breathing beside her like a lullaby, but then it changed, sharpened, erratic. A deep, wet rasp broke the quiet, jerking her awake. Harold? No answer. She turned on the bedside lamp. He was drenched in sweat, his brow furrowed, skin pale, lips slightly blue. His hands clutched the sheets, arms trembling. Harold, she shouted, gripping his shoulders. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, glazed. Then came the seizure. His body jerked violently, limbs spasming against the mattress. Martha leapt into action, slipping a pillow beneath his head, clearing the nightstand, dialing 900. And 11, with hands trained by old instincts she thought she'd buried with her nurse's badge decades ago. The ambulance arrived within 7 minutes. By then, Harold had slipped into unconsciousness. And Cleveland Medical Center, ICU wing, 4:47 a.m. Dr. Peterson stood beside the bed, watching monitors as Harold lay motionless. Intubated, surrounded by blinking machines and plastic tubing, Martha sat in the corner, her face a mask of stillness. But her eyes, red-rimmed and hollow, never left her husband. It's some sort of neural cascade, Peterson explained, notepad in hand. We think the tissue we removed may have altered more than we expected. There's new inflammation around the spine, rapid onset. Are you saying it's spreading? She asked, her voice low. I'm saying we may have only removed the physical mass, but something deeper, biochemical, neurological, was already in motion. Martha blinked slowly. And now? We're trying everything we can. High-dose corticosteroids, cooling, monitoring. But if there's no improvement by tonight, we need to prepare for all outcomes. She nodded. That's how they said it now. Prepare. Not he might die, not he's not going to make it. Just the sanitized version. The hallway whispers of people, trained to hide tragedy under protocol. But Martha had seen death before, and this looked like death. She waited until Peterson left the room, then stood and walked to the bed, Harold looked smaller than she remembered. So many times he had stood tall beside her. Through jobs lost, through Sarah, his rebellious years, through mortgage renewals and unexpected surgeries, a constant presence, her pillar. And now, he looked like a boy, a tired boy, slipping. She took his hand. "Harold Morrison, if you're listening," she whispered, "you don't get to check out now. Not after you told me the truth. Not after you burned those letters. Not after you finally let me see you." A tear traced her cheek. "I spent 48 years being your wife. Don't you dare leave me now, when I finally know the man behind the silence." She placed her head beside his arm, sobbing quietly. And that's when it happened. The monitor beeped, an uptick. A shift in rhythm. She sat up, blinking. The screen showed a gradual increase in brain activity, subtle, but rising. She leaned forward. "Harold?" Nothing. Then, barely audible, he groaned. His hand twitched. Martha shot to the door, calling for the nurse. Within moments, Peterson returned, followed by 2 techs and a respiratory therapist. They hovered around the bed as Harold's vitals stabilized further. "He's coming back," one nurse whispered. Peterson stared at the readout. No coma patient should spike this quickly. Not without stimulation, not without cause. Martha gripped the railing. "What does that mean?" Peterson hesitated. "It means something in his system is responding, and we don't know why." By morning, Harold was breathing on his own. The ventilator removed. Monitors disconnected. Still groggy, but conscious. Peterson entered the room holding the latest scan results. "I don't know how to explain it," he said, glancing between Harold and Martha. "But the nerve clusters around the excised mass are regressing, shrinking. It's like whatever signal they were sending stopped." Harold looked at him. "And you think that's a good thing?" "I think your body is resetting," Peterson replied, "like an immune reaction after an organ transplant. Except backwards." Martha tilted her head. "Meaning?" "Meaning, your body doesn't need to fight anymore." Silence followed. Then Harold spoke, voice hoarse. "What if it wasn't just physical? What if that thing was holding something emotional too?" Peterson frowned. "Like what?" "Memory," Harold said. "Guilt, grief. I've lived with that thing in me for decades, and only after I told the truth, after I stopped lying to myself, did it start to let go." Peterson looked unconvinced, but Martha understood. Because she had seen it, in the letters, in the fire, in his eyes when he first woke up after surgery, not just from sedation, but from years of emotional paralysis. He was healing, not just the body, the soul. 3 days later, Harold was discharged, still weak, still recovering. But something was different now. Lighter, clearer. Back home, the sun broke through a rare patch of late winter clouds as they pulled into the driveway. Sarah had come by earlier to warm up the house, stock the fridge, leave. A note on the counter that simply read, "You scared the hell out of me. Don't do that again. Love you." Harold smiled when he saw it. That afternoon, he sat in the backyard with Martha, wrapped in blankets, a cup of tea steaming in his hand. "You think it's really gone?" he asked. She looked at him. The pain? No. The weight. She thought for a moment. Maybe not gone, but different. He nodded. They watched the birds gather near the feeder. The wind rolled softly through the trees, no longer biting, just cool, honest, cleansing. "Do you ever wonder why it happened to me?" he asked. "Why what happened? Why the bullet stayed? Why it became what it did?" Martha looked at him. "Because maybe you needed to carry it, until you were ready to lay it down." He took her hand, and this time, there was no tremble. 2 weeks after Harold left the hospital, an envelope arrived. It was unassuming. White, standard size, no return address. Martha found it wedged between a flyer for roofing services and a water bill. She almost tossed it aside until she saw the words, "To Mr. Harold Morrison. Concerning your case." She opened it cautiously, eyes narrowing as she scanned the page. Then she called out, "Harold, you're going to want to read this." They sat together at the dining table as Harold read the letter aloud. "Dear Mr. Morrison, my name is Daniel Reyes. I'm a reporter with the Cleveland Ledger, specializing in veteran affairs and public health. A contact in the VA medical system anonymously forwarded me limited details about a case involving a Vietnam veteran, a recovered foreign body, and an unusually resilient healing process. I believe that case is yours. I know this is a sensitive topic, But as someone who's spent the last 3 years writing about PTSD, long-term injury recovery, and the silence many veterans live with, I believe your story could have real impact. If you're willing, I'd like to speak with you, not for sensationalism, but for truth. With respect, Daniel Reyes Harold set the letter down. His hand lingered on the edge of the paper, his eyes unreadable. Martha watched him closely. "What are you thinking?" he exhaled. "I don't know. You've told your story, to me, to Bill, to yourself." He nodded. "But telling it to the world? That's different." She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Maybe the world needs it." He looked up. "Or maybe I'm just one old man with a strange scar and a box full of regrets." "You're more than that, Harold, and you know it." He didn't respond, but 2 days later, he called the number at the bottom of the letter, and Daniel Reyes was younger than Harold expected. Early 30s maybe, with thick black glasses, a leather notebook, and a voice that carried a kind of cautious reverence. He arrived at their home one cold March afternoon, removing his boots, politely, and asking first thing if Harold was comfortable sharing. "I'm not here to poke holes," he said. "I just want to understand, and maybe help others do the same." They sat in the living room. Martha brought tea. Daniel's recorder sat on the table, blinking red. "So," Daniel began, flipping to a fresh page, "I know the official records say your injury was from enemy fire, but that's not accurate, is it?" Harold shook his head slowly. "It was friendly fire," he said. "July 1971. Khe-Sanh. Our lieutenant panicked, ordered a shot that shouldn't have been fired. I hesitated. I paid for it." Daniel scribbled something but kept eye contact. "And you kept the bullet inside you. For decades." "I didn't exactly choose to. The doctor said it was too deep. I said fine, leave it. I didn't want to see it anyway." He paused. "But the truth is, I didn't just leave it in my body. I let it stay in my mind. I built around it. Buried everything with it." Daniel leaned forward. "What changed?" Harold looked at Martha. She did. Martha smiled gently but said nothing. "She told me to stop pretending. And when I finally opened up, the pain started to change. Even before the surgery, it's like my body knew I wasn't lying anymore." Daniel nodded slowly. "There's research now about how trauma lives in tissue, how our bodies hold memory." "I believe it," Harold said, "because I lived it. And the mass they removed, what did it look like?" Harold gestured toward a small wooden box on the shelf. Inside, preserved in a sealed container, was a high-resolution photo of the foreign tissue. Daniel studied it in silence. "It's organic," he said, "but not chaotic. I always said it looked like something trying to grow its way out of me." Harold murmured. "Now I think, maybe it was trying to teach me something." Daniel looked up. "Do you want to go public with this?" Harold hesitated. "I don't know what that even means anymore. It means your story gets told, not in a medical journal, in a way that reaches people, other vets, families, people who've carried pain for decades and don't know how to let it go." Harold nodded slowly. "You can change the names, leave out the science, just make it about a man, and a wound that never healed until he told the truth." Harold met Martha's eyes. She nodded, and he said, "Okay." And the article ran 2 weeks later. Front page, Sunday edition. The headline read, "The Bullet and the Silence. One veteran's journey to heal a wound 50 years deep." The response was immediate. Veterans wrote in from Florida, Oregon, Michigan, men and women who'd kept their own stories quiet for decades. Some had injuries that never healed. Others had guilt that kept them from sleeping. A few had sons and daughters who'd never known what their fathers carried. One letter stood out. It was handwritten, shaky, but clear. "Dear Mr. Morrison, my husband died in 1983. He never talked about the war. Never told me how he got hurt. After I read your article, I realized he was like you, trying to protect me from the truth. Thank you for saying what he couldn't. I feel like I finally understand him. Janice K., widow of Sergeant Michael K., USMC." Harold folded the letter slowly. Martha saw the wetness in his eyes. "You did something good," she whispered. He looked at her, voice tight. "I never thought I could. Not with that part of my life, but now you know better." He nodded. "It's not about the bullet anymore," he said. "It's about the silence." That weekend, they drove out to a veterans community center near Akron. Daniel had arranged a private gathering. Just a few men, some wives, one grandson of a World War II pilot. They sat in a circle of old chairs, coffee cups in hand, faces open but cautious. Harold stood in front of them and told his story. Not with drama, not with embellishment, just truth. He spoke of fear, of guilt, of burying pain so deep it rewired his body. He spoke of the letter he never sent, the fire they made in the backyard, the hand that held his through the seizures. When he finished, there was no applause, just silence, the good kind. Then a man across the room stood. He wore a navy jacket, hair completely white. "My brother died in '69, he said. I always blamed myself. He wanted to go. I didn't stop him. For 50 years I've carried that." He looked at Harold. "And tonight, I think I can finally set it down." And the drive home, Harold didn't speak for a long time, just watched the trees pass by, a blur of bare branches and early buds. Then he said, "It still hurts." Martha glanced at him. "You're back?" He shook his head. "The things I didn't say, the men I didn't write to, the decades I spent hiding." She reached across the console, took his hand. "But you said it now." He nodded. "And I think it's finally enough." The morning sky was soft with haze, a thin layer of mist hovering over the open fields of the Milbrook Veterans Cemetery. Rows upon rows of headstones stretched in silent formation, there, white marble faces catching the early light like quiet sentinels. Harold stood near Section 7C, a bundle of letters in one hand, a folded American flag in the other. Martha stood beside him, wrapped in her green wool coat, her arm tucked gently through his. Bill M.C. Kenna was there too, his cane in one hand, a thermos of black coffee in the other. The two men hadn't spoken much that morning. They didn't need to. Some friendships deepen not in words, but in presence. Sarah had driven in from Columbus, her teenage son Eli, standing respectfully a few feet behind, hands in his pockets. He wasn't quite sure why they were here, but he understood enough to stay quiet. This wasn't a funeral, it was something quieter, something older, something sacred, and Harold knelt before one of the markers. PVT Andrew Madison, U.S. Army, 1950 to 1971, beloved son. Brave soldier. He placed the bundle of letters at the base of the stone. "I wrote to your mother," Harold said softly. "I never mailed it. I told her you didn't suffer, that you were brave, that you died trying to protect the radio." He paused. "That was true, but I left out the part about how scared we all were, how none of us knew what we were doing, how we followed orders because that's what good soldiers do." His voice cracked. "How I watched you bleed and couldn't stop it." He laid the flag down beside the letters. "I've been carrying this weight, Andy, for all of us, but I think it's time I set it down." He rose slowly, Martha steadying him. They moved to the next stone. Lieutenant James Norville, U.S. Army, 1949 to 1979. Harold stared at it for a long time. He hadn't planned to stop here, but something in him refused to walk past. He was just a kid, Harold murmured. Arrogant, scared, like we all were. I hated him for what he did. But I hated myself more for letting it happen, for not calling it out, for pretending it didn't matter. He turned to Bill. "We all paid for it." Bill nodded slowly. "But we're still here." Harold looked back at the stone. "And that's not nothing." Later, they stood by a modest memorial wall, etched with the names of the lost, the missing, the never returned. A simple plaque read, "They carried each other." Eli stepped forward, reading it aloud. Then he turned to Harold. "Is that what you did, Grandpa?" Harold looked at him. "Yes," he said. "Sometimes in the worst ways, and sometimes in the only ways we knew how." Eli nodded like he understood. And maybe he did. Maybe he would carry that sentence with him into whatever future war or peace the world might bring. They returned home just before dusk. The house was quiet. The wind had picked up, rustling the bare branches outside. Martha brewed tea while Harold sat at the kitchen table, the leather-bound journal open in front of him. He flipped to the final page. Only one blank space remained. He picked up his pen and began to write. March 21st, 2025, Milbrook, Ohio. Today I said goodbye to ghosts, not with anger, not with shame, but with the kind of respect one gives to old enemies who once tried to kill you, but ended up teaching you how to live. I've spent 50 years thinking I was a man broken by one moment in the jungle, but now I know, maybe I was reforged, bent, scarred, but not destroyed. I used to believe silence was strength, that burying pain made you brave. But it doesn't. It just delays the wound, makes it deeper. Now I know. Strength is telling the truth, even when it shakes you. Especially when it shakes you. To anyone reading this someday, you're not alone. No matter what you carry, no matter how long it's been, there is always a way back. He set the pen down, closed the journal, and let out a long, full breath, like he had finally emptied a room that had been locked in his chest since 1971. That night, Harold and Martha sat by the fireplace, the logs crackling softly. Outside, the moon cast a pale glow on the snow-dusted yard. Sarah had gone back to Columbus. Bill had returned to his small apartment near Akron. It was just the two of them again. As it had always been, Martha reached over, placing a hand on Harold's knee. "You feel lighter," she said. He smiled. "Because I am." "Think you'll ever open that journal again?" "No," he said. "It's finished." The last page was always going to be about letting go. They sat in comfortable silence. Then she asked, "Do you regret anything?" He thought for a long time. "I regret not speaking sooner, not saying goodbye to some of the boys, not holding your hand more in the early years when I was too distracted by ghosts." She smiled. "You made up for it. I tried. You succeeded." He looked at her, eyes filled with a calm he hadn't known in years. "I didn't just survive, did I?" "No," she said. "You lived." They leaned into each other, and for the first time in decades, the fire inside them was warm, not burning, not painful, just alive. Sometimes, the deepest scars are the ones no one can see. The memories we bury, the truths we carry in silence, thinking that protecting others means hiding parts of ourselves. But Harold and Martha Morrison taught us something else. That true healing doesn't come from forgetting the past. It comes from facing it together. It comes from love brave enough to hold both pain and truth in the same hand. As the snow fell gently outside their window and Moon River played softly from an old radio, two people who had once been strangers to each other's deepest wounds finally found peace, not in perfect resolution, but in honest connection. In finally saying, "I see you, I know what you've carried, and I'm still here. What about you? What stories have you been carrying in silence? What would change if you finally told them?" Leave a comment below. Your truth might be the light someone else needs tonight. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Because somewhere, someone is waiting to hear the story that lets them begin again. Let's keep telling them, together,